Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that moves, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's beat these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. Fran, here we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right, another week, and we've got an NFC East matchup as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 220. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I catch up with NFL Film senior producer Greg Cosell to talk about what we saw in the Eagles game against the New York Giants on Monday Night Football before we transition to this weekend's matchup against the Washington Redskins. After that, we will dive into my notes from Dwayne Haskins, the rookie quarterback for Washington, as he came out of Ohio State last year. How did I see him a year ago? How has he transitioned so far to the NFL? We'll talk about that in our scouting report segment, but let's not waste any more time. Let's get to the top of the show here. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Happy to be joined once again here on Chalk Talk on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. He's not in studio this week because of the short week. Tuesday morning here, the morning after the Eagles' big win over the New York Giants. Pleased to be joined by Greg Cosell from NFL Films from his comfy, cozy lair, laboratory, whatever you want to call it, over at Films. Greg, welcome back to the show.
All right, Fran, it's good to be here. I'm sure you and I probably didn't get a lot of sleep last night, but that's the way of the world.
That's the way of life in the NFL. But look, a huge win for the Eagles, a much-needed win. Hopefully something that can kind of serve as a little bit of a launching pad here down the stretch. Obviously getting ready to take on this Washington football team that we'll talk about a little bit later in the segment. But let's first focus here on the overtime win on Monday Night Football under the lights against the New York Giants. Ugly first half. I mean, on both sides of the football, offensively, they couldn't get much going. They lose Alshon Jeffrey relatively early in the game. You lose Lane Johnson relatively early in the game. You came in without Nelson Aguilar, so you go from 3 receivers dressed down to 2. Josh Perkins has to play a lot. Boston Scott has to play a lot, especially because Miles Sanders goes out. So a lot of mixing and matching, which has basically been the status quo for this Eagles offense throughout the course of the 2019 season. But they were able to make it work in the second half, and they come back and get the W.
No, you're right. I mean, obviously, Lane Johnson getting hurt, Vaitai came in. At least he's a player with experience. When Jeffrey got hurt, they were in tough shape at receiver with Arcega-Whiteside and Ward. And Perkins obviously played a good amount of snaps, and it became really a 12 and 13 personnel offense.
Yep.
So you had some limitations in what you could do offensively. But, they had some long drives in the second half. I mean, they had the long drive where they obviously scored a touchdown. They had another long drive which ended in a missed field goal, but then they had the long scoring drive to tie it, and obviously the one that won in overtime. But it was tough going for a good part of the game.
No question. So let's talk about what they were able to kind of do to get things turned around. And I think when you look around at the box score and you say, man, Boston Scott, Josh Perkins, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside came up with a big catch. Greg Ward had a couple of grabs. Not names that we would have anticipated coming into the season. It looked more like what we would see on a Thursday night in August in the third quarter as opposed to a Monday night in December. But when we look at what they were able to do, I thought Carson Wentz had one of his better games of the season. Made plays when they needed to be made, and I thought that the guys on the other end, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside on a touchdown drive came up with an outstanding catch, arguably the best catch of any wide receiver on the Eagles roster all season long when he made that catch down the field in the fade over the shoulder. I think when you look at what some of those young guys did, I think that gives you a little bit of hope moving down the stretch here that, all right, this is something hopefully that they can build off of down the stretch in these final 3 games.
Yeah, it was an odd game because, as you said, the first half was difficult to watch. It was difficult to watch live, and it was difficult to watch on tape.
Yeah.
And I think the blame goes around for that first half. It's not one thing. It was a lot of factors. There were just missed plays. There were some plays to be made that were not made. That was actually true in I believe, in the second half as well. I remember Sanders actually, and he's blocked extremely well this year. He missed a block on Ogletree where Perkins, it would have been a touchdown.
Yep.
And I know you know the play I'm speaking about. And but obviously, it's an offense that's limited, as we both know, in their big play capability. So you see a lot of 9-yard plays, 10-yard plays. That has to be their MO. Some of the longer plays occurred. I actually like the Ertz 30-yarder on the first field goal drive was a really well-designed double post corner route concept that broke down the cover 3. I still am trying to figure out what the coverage was on the Goddard 28-yard play. If you know what the coverage was, I'd love to know, because I probably looked at that play 10 times.
Right. At first, I thought it was cover 3 when I was watching. I thought it was zone because I'm looking at the underneath defenders, and you see that guys are kind of they looked like they were spot dropping in the middle. But watching it more and more this morning, because I did the breakdown last night of it, and I thought, it was zone. I kind of think that the Giants, and they had a few of these in this game, a busted coverage. It looked like it was supposed to be David Mayo that may have been supposed to run down the seam with Dallas Goedert. They ran a little post-wheel combination, basically, with Goddard, and he was wide open down the seam. It seemed like one of those linebackers, whether it was Ogletree or Mayo, was supposed to run down with them, and no one did.
Well, it's funny because Goddard started on the opposite side of the formation, and with Ertz, I believe, on that side. I think it was Ertz.
Yep.
And they had 2 defenders over them, so it could have been man at that point. But then when Goddard crossed the formation to make it a 1-by-3 set, no one went with him. So, that led me to believe that it was a zone concept. But again, when he ran the seam, and they ended up with 4 to the field because the back raced to the flat to that side. So they ended up with 4 to the field, but no one accounted for Goddard running down the seam. And you whether it's man or zone, someone has to do that.
Yep. I think that you obviously the Eagles were able to come up with a couple of those conversions where you were able to take advantage of some miscues defensively from the Giants. I know the first play of overtime certainly looked like it was a little bit of a bust on that play to Miles Sanders in the flat. Obviously the game-winning touchdown, a busted coverage with Zach Ertz wide open in the back of the end zone. Certainly a handful of those in this game. What I like to see, and I think a lot of people want to know, all right, they got a little bit of juice from Boston Scott, who does have, that's one of his most redeeming qualities for sure, is that he's got that short area burst. He's got that ability to pull away. He's got some dynamic qualities. We saw some make you miss, and he did it both in the run game and in the pass game on Monday night.
And that's a great point, and it's an offense that sorely needs it, because even if they have their full complement of receivers, they don't have that with their receivers. So they need it somewhere. And I actually thought the play call with Scott, the 25-yard run, that was an overtime, I believe, was it not?
It was. Yep. The pin
that was. Obviously, when they do the orbit motion with Ward, they don't know for certain that the corner is going to run with Ward. You don't know that for sure when you call the play, but it doesn't matter because they had a blocker for him anyway. But I thought that was a nice play call. It was kind of a guard center pull scheme, and it was. I can't remember whether it was to the field or the boundary, but it worked really, really well. And like I said, even if the corner stayed there, they had a blocker for him. So that was a really nice play. They came back to it later with Sanders on the same drive. Wasn't as effective, but at that time, it really worked well.
Yeah, and I thought that in this game, the Eagles were able to get the screen game going a little bit. And we've seen in recent weeks that the screen game had struggled. The defense was able to sniff some of those out. I can think of some to Sanders, some to Goddard, where the defense just seemed to be all over it. But in this game, I thought that they really sold the screen game well. They had a couple of really nice ones, even if they were some simple bubble screens or flash screens to the perimeter, but also some of those basic, 3-count running back screens out of the backfield. Miles Sanders had one. Boston Scott had one. So I thought they were able to get the screen game going as well.
And that's a significant part of their offense because in some ways that takes the place of the fact that they don't really have a strong intermediate and vertical game. They did try some things in this game. We mentioned the Ertz 30-yarder on the first field goal drive in the second quarter. There were a couple of other designed vertical route combinations that for whatever reason did not work. Some were just missed blocks. I thought that Wentz did make a really, really good throw to Ward on the one that was incomplete. Even on the replays, I couldn't tell if Bethea got his hand on that or not.
It looked like he got a fingertip on it.
Yeah, it would have been a tough catch. It was a great throw. It was a catchable ball. I believe that play came after the challenge by Peterson. So, obviously it was a situation where I don't think that was where the field goal was missed, so they did not come away with points.
Right, and honestly, the throw before that, if Greg Ward had not tipped that ball, obviously the PI would have been more in play. But I thought JJ Arcega-Whiteside may have had a chance on that play. I thought that was an outstanding play from Carson as well, where he broke the pocket, made one defender miss outside the numbers, kind of ducked through contact, and then was able to unleash that ball down the field. That looked like it was heading right for JJ's chest as he's sliding to the ground. But unfortunately, just again, Greg Ward doesn't know that. He's jumping up, trying to make a play as well, and the ball's tipped and falls incomplete.
No, you're right. You're right. But the catch by Arcega-Whiteside, the one you referenced earlier, I mean, theoretically, that's why he's drafted, to be able to make plays like that.
Yep.
He's got the bigger body. He's got the good hands. He's not a burner, so he's not necessarily going to win by running by people, but he can make those tough, contested body control catches. That was his MO at Stanford.
Yep. To me, one of the biggest parts of the success of that play was, that he was able to defeat press coverage from Sam Beal and hold that red line. We talk a lot about that imaginary red line between the numbers and the sideline. Give the quarterback room outside towards the sideline to deliver that throw, drop it in a bucket so it's not a really tight space. So him being able, it wasn't a great jam from Sam Beal, so it's not like, it was against Darrelle Revis there, but being able to maintain that red line, stay vertical, hold his stem well, giving Carson Wentz room outside the numbers was a big part of that play. And obviously the tracking and the finish was big as well.
No question. But it was, it was a game where I was kind of getting ready to go to bed, Fran. And then I kept saying, well, let me watch a little more. And all of a sudden it got close. And then they missed the field goal in the fourth quarter. And I'm thinking, oh, boy. But, I just had to stay with it.
Yeah, no, it was one of the other big things we haven't quite talked about a lot was, I think a week ago, Zach Ertz was really down on himself for just how that game ended down in South Beach in Miami, put a lot of that on himself. To see him come back, 9 catches, 91 yards. You mentioned he had a couple of those catches that led to the early field goal in the first half, their only points of the first half, and then to have the 2 touchdowns both in fourth quarter to tie the game and then also in overtime to walk off with the victory. I thought that was really good to see, kind of that resiliency, a little bit of a macro or a micro look at the resiliency of this team to see him bounce back that way.
Yeah, and I thought the 2-yard touchdown, which tied it, was we've seen that concept many, many times where they had 3 tight ends, obviously, to that side of the field, to the closed boundary, and then that play was designed for Ertz with the combination routes by both Perkins, I think, was outside, and Goddard was inside, and Ertz was number 2 in that closed boundary 3 tight end set. And, they basically got him one-on-one on Love. And now that was a great throw by Wentz and a great catch because there was not a lot of room there. Love did not play that poorly.
No, and honestly, we were watching the game. I was watching the tape back this morning with Ben Fennell, and I turned to him and I said, how many times since 2016 have we seen them hook up on this play, whether it's on the goal line, the red zone, third down, fourth down? It's been such a hallmark play for them, and it's honestly, the success rate on it has been very, very good as well. It's certainly one of their moneymakers.
No, it's a staple, and we've seen it both in the tight red zone. I mean, they normally do it in the tight red zone. If you get a little further out, they go with the other play, which they really like, which is the touchdown he caught against Chicago and the one he unfortunately dropped last week.
Yeah, the corner post, yep. And then let's go over to the defensive side real quick as well. Again, you kind of say the same thing about the offense. Ugly start to the game. And really, I wouldn't even say it was a full, oh, man, this was just terrible all around. It really came down to 2 plays. The Giants went 2 for 12 on third down the entire night. The defense was able to lock them down on third down and get off the field. It just so happened that those 2 third down conversions happened to be big plays to Darius Slay down the left sideline. One on a quick throw that was a missed tackle, and he ran the rest of the way, and one on a deep ball. And that was what we asked you to break down last week on Eagles Game Plan, were 2 very similar plays with Slayton, the rookie out of Auburn, who's got that long speed, and he showed that in the first half.
Yeah, and that second one was obviously a busted coverage.
Yes.
I would assume it was Darby because the ball was caught outside the numbers, which normally is the corner. But, again, I don't know how they map all that out, but it was certainly a bust. And the first one was what they've done a lot of this year, and they've had success where they lined up with that 5 across front with Bradham, and he came, and then they brought Jenkins on the green dog, but the Giants did not slide their front. They matched up one-on-one across the board, so Jenkins did not have a clear path. Barkley was able to pick him up without a problem, plus the ball came out quick.
Yeah, the ball came out quick, and he was able to, make sure he uncovered, was able to make the catch, and Darby unable to make the tackle in that situation. Outside of those two plays, and I know the how was the rest of the play, Mrs. Lincoln, but outside of those two plays, defensively, I thought we saw some good things. One guy that continues to flash for me, Greg, is Nate Gary. I'm not saying that he's turning into one of the best linebackers in the NFL, but he's continuing to flash over the last few weeks, and I know he was put in the spotlight a little bit in that loss to Seattle with that missed tackle that led to a big play. But ultimately, I think that he's really kind of turned it around over the last few weeks, and he's very, very active, always around the ball, had a couple of one-on-one stops with Saquon Barkley, had a couple of pass breakups as well. So I thought he was really active in this game.
Yeah, and he's going to be a guy as they go forward. They're going to have to make a decision as to whether he's a starting linebacker.
Right.
He's obviously been a starter this year, but he's one of those guys. As we go forward, a decision will have to be made. He's a young player. He's in his second year, I believe, right?
Correct. Second or third year, out of Nebraska. They all meshed together for me.
Yeah. No, you start to forget that. But, no, he'll be a guy they'll have to make a decision about as to whether they see him as a starter going forward. Because linebacker is a position they'll probably have to address at some point, and Gary becomes an interesting evaluation as to how they see him.
Yep, and I think a lot of people will say, all right, well, what was the difference in the defense from first half to second half? And I mentioned, outside of those two plays in the first half, it was more of the same. I will say that it seemed like they did mix up coverages a little bit, particularly on third down. We saw a little bit more split safety, a little bit more quarter half, the combo coverages. What did you see when watching the defense on third down?
No, I would say that's fair, and I'm just going to put my glasses on here because I made a note that when the Eagles were in their four-corner dime with a LeBlanc, their tendency was to play cover one. When they were in their three-safety dime, and that meant Epps was playing, they tended to play more zone. Now, in a critical situation in the game, 3rd and 3 with less than 2 minutes to go, they were in the three-safety dime, but that time they played man because the situation demanded it. But that was really their tendency during the game. So LeBlanc played in the dime as the fourth corner, and then Epps played in the dime as the third safety, and you're 100% right. They played more snaps of split safety this week as opposed to post safety, and they mixed it up with, like you said, they played cover 4, cover 6. At one point they got to cover 2 with disguise and late movement. It was when the Giants had the ball deep in their own end on a third down play. So I think they tried to mix up things a little bit more.
Yeah, that forced Eli Manning to hold on to the ball, look a little bit, I don't want to say frenetic, but you saw a couple where he was just uncomfortable getting rid of the football. That led to some incompletions. There was one over the middle. I can remember the one that Nate Gary broke up. Nigel Bradham was in position to defend one throw and kind of forced Eli to hold it, where they were able to just kind of mix things up, use some disguise, and make him question what he was seeing on the back end. And I thought that was really, really effective for them in that game. Thinking of one other third down stop that kind of stands out to me was that attempted flea flicker by the New York Giants. And look, the play, it's funny. The play in itself worked. They had a receiver going down the seam. I've never seen this action though, Greg. And tell me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you've seen it. With the endless hours of film that you've studied over the years. But with the flea flicker with the draw action, where you're sucking the D-line up, selling pass, hand it off, then have the running back toss it back to the quarterback.
Right.
Josh Sweat was basically back there already because he had already been sucked up by the draw. So that was, to me, one of the things that led to that play not working for New York.
Yeah, that surprised me. I mean, first of all, it surprised me that you would do that that was 3rd and long.
Yeah.
Because the Eagles were playing sticks coverage. That was just a surprising play. Only they could tell you why they called it. Obviously, it didn't work. But you know what was odd is the Eagles players who were at the sticks, a bunch of them came racing up.
Yeah, they bit it. No question. He was going to be open.
Yeah, theoretically, the play could have worked. But You're right. The draw action kind of brought the defensive line into the backfield.
Right, yeah. If it was against a different defensive line that wasn't as aggressive upfield, I would say, I can kind of see how that would work. But going back to that defensive line, Vinny Curry had a couple sacks in the game. One of them did come on third down, where you saw that cover 6, that combo coverage, where it was quarters on one side and cover 2 on the other. So the coverage kind of allowed Vinny Curry to be able to get home. The other, he just flew off the ball. This was a first down sack. He flew off the ball, beat the tight end, beat Solder off the corner, and was able to get home for a sack as well. So really good to see that. I thought Josh Sweat had a couple of really nice rushes in the game. BG, Brandon Graham had a couple of nice rushes. The ball was just coming out very, very quickly, and obviously they wanted to stay committed to the run game with Saquon Barkley as well.
Yeah, and I thought they did a good job in the run game.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, Barkley did not really break one. I thought they got a lot of bodies to him. I thought when they were in their base 4-3, and I don't know how many snaps he played, but I thought that Edwards flashed again.
He did.
At times. And again, not necessarily the number of tackles, but just very active in the middle of the defense.
First play of the game.
What's that?
First play of the game, he rifled downhill and was able to disrupt the path for Saquon and force him to bounce and ended up into a 1-yard gain or a 0-yard gain.
Yeah, he's shown that when he's played this year. And again, another guy, a free agent, a lot of snaps in the Big Ten, a lot of production in the Big Ten, but was viewed as not necessarily having the traits. But we've also seen in this league a lot of those kinds of players as base defense players. Nobody's suggesting he's a 3-down player because he's not. But guys like that can be interesting as stacked backers in a base 4-3. Another guy who I think has put some good tape out there.
Yeah.
I don't know what the Eagles feel about him and as they go forward, but I think he's put some good tape out there when he's played.
No question. Yeah, it's always fun to be able to watch some of these young guys and just continue to watch them develop, especially when you watch them in college and see how they make that transition. All right, Greg, let's now transition to this matchup against the Washington Redskins here on Sunday. Look, every game at this point, as we get into the end part of this season, is the stakes just get higher and higher because now, with Washington, this is a team. They've won 2 of the last 3. They already got Ron Rivera fired down in Carolina. They gave Green Bay all they could handle. It was a 1-score game last week. So this is a team that has not given up. They have not gone to the tank. They're playing very hard. We said this a couple of weeks ago against Miami. This was a team that, especially on defense, they are playing very hard.
Yeah, and I think we have to understand one thing, and we're not saying anything wrong here. The Eagles are not a team at this point in time that looks like they're going to put up 35 on a weekly basis. So every game is relatively close. And in some ways, you could argue that the Eagles game with the Redskins this week could be much like the Packers-Redskins game last week, where the Redskins were essentially in the game until the middle of the fourth quarter, I guess, when the Packers kicked that field goal to make it a 2-score game.
Yeah.
But you're right. The defense, Kerrigan was back this week. They've got a good D-line, although it struggled against the run. I think Aaron Jones, by the way, is a really, really good runner, and I loved him coming out of UTEP. But I think for the most part, their D-line is very, very good. There's always individual isolated plays where those D linemen just look sensational and dominate the player in front of them. I think they've had some up and down success at the stacked linebacker position. They essentially play 3 stacked backers throughout the course of the game, both in base and nickel. That's Bostic, Holcomb, and Hamilton. So, obviously they're searching. They don't feel really comfortable with just putting 2 really good guys there, so they mix and match.
Yeah, I think when you look at that front 7, certainly, as you said, the strength is that front 3. Those 3 down linemen in their base 3-4. You look at Daron Payne at the nose tackle, Jonathan Allen at right end, and then Matt Ioannidis, the Temple kid, at left end. They're very good with their stunts and twists. Ioannidis in particular is really, really effective in those schemes. Payne, strong, he's powerful, he's disruptive, and Jonathan Allen is just a really good all-around player, and he's actually really stood out to me on film, especially over the last few weeks. I think he's been arguably their best defensive player watching Jonathan Allen play over the last few weeks. I think he's really kind of come on here at this point in the season. Off the edge, you mentioned Kerrigan's back. They're also starting that rookie first-round pick, Montez Sweat, who, there were a couple of times where I thought he kind of got reached in the run game and gave up the edge in this game against Green Bay. But overall, I think you're starting to see some flashes with him as well as a pass rusher. I
would agree. I think he's had nice development for a rookie, and we know that he's got good size, long arms. He can rush the quarterback. I remember a play he made this week in the run game where I thought he did a really, really nice job. So, no, they've got a very good let's put it this way. The 5 across in their base 3-4 are very, very good.
Right.
Obviously, Sweat and Kerrigan are their pass rushers when they go nickel. They're not a big dime team. They had some injuries in the secondary last week. The fascinating thing was Josh Norman was healthy and did not play a snap.
Right.
So, they've been starting Moreau and Dunbar at corner. I know Dunbar got hurt and he was out. So then I forget who they moved Moreland outside in their base.
Right.
And then when they went to their I know Moreau came back at some point.
Yeah, if Moreau came back. Simeon Thomas came in, and he played a good amount of snaps for them in this game.
And he looks the part. I don't know much about his background, but he is long and athletic.
Honestly, very similar to Dunbar when you looked at the size profile and how he was coming out of college. I want to say he may have been Rice. I'm trying to remember. I definitely watched him coming out. But Simeon Thomas, Quentin Dunbar, I think are very similar from a size speed profile. I think when you look at those guys, they're still trying to figure it out. Certainly on the back end at safety, you've got Monte Nicholson playing in the post, Landon Collins playing as the strong safety.
Yes. And they're pretty defined in what they do there.
Yeah.
They play a lot of single high. So Nicholson is the post safety. He's a big guy. He's got straight line speed. I would say that he's probably a little tight hip to be a true post safety in an ideal world, but his straight line speed is really good, and he plays downhill very well.
Yeah, he's got the ability to go up and make the play on the ball as well. When he's got that ability to get outside the numbers, he's got that range to be able to do that. Schematically, when you look at this defense, what's the profile on them in terms of moving into this matchup?
They're one of those teams that you have to talk about them, I think, in their sub-nickel, because in their base, we know they're a 3-4.
Yep.
But I think when you get to their sub-nickel, they're not a high-percentage blitz defense. They have some blitz tendencies. We've talked about that over the last couple of years. But I think they rely on their down 4 for their pass rush with Kerrigan back in particular. And we know that Kerrigan has given the Eagles problems at times, and it looks like he'll probably be matched against Vaitai this week. I think that would be probably the assumption at this point, Fran, don't you think?
Yeah, probably. Again, we're recording this before Doug Peterson's day after press conference, so we haven't gotten any kind of word yet. But certainly the way the injury looked, it did not look promising.
I mean, even if it's a high ankle sprain, he's not likely to be back this week.
Right.
And
so
we're
that would be
talking
the
Lane
matchup.
Johnson, of course. So Kerrigan's always given the Eagles some problems off the edge. So I think that's really kind of their MO. They're tough inside, like you said, with Allen Payne. Ioannidis he's a way better player than people probably thought he might become coming out of Temple, but he's a really good player. Now, I think you can attack these linebackers in coverage. I think that's an area you have to look at hard when you play against this team. You can attack these linebackers in coverage.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly an area you can try and figure out to see if you can get some matchups there, whether it's out in the perimeter or in the middle of the field. Let's go over to the other side and talk about this Washington offense. Obviously, Jay Gruden was let go in the middle of the season, so Bill Callahan promoted to interim head coach. What are your thoughts? Has the scheme changed in your mind? What are they doing offensively, especially now? The last time these two teams faced, Case Keenum was the quarterback. Now you've got the rookie Dwayne Haskins in there as well.
Well, I think the scheme has changed a bit, because I think they start, as you know, Fran, with the run game. Yeah. And we know Geis will be out this week, and it'll be Peterson, but he still runs very, very hard. I mean, you saw the tape this past week.
Yep.
He runs hard. And so you need to get bodies to him. But I think getting to the point about the scheme, I think what you're looking at a little bit more now with the new quarterback in Haskins is a little more of the play action and a little more of the deeper drops, and that's what Haskins is. And they line up with 6 offensive linemen. They want to run the ball. They want to be physical. They play with a fullback at times. It's a little bit of an old school offense. They've got the big, strong arm quarterback who's not a particularly good mover. They need to protect him, so they need bigger bodies. Haskins, I think, as to be expected, has been up and down. He certainly can stand in the pocket and sit on that back foot and drive the football and make those intermediate throws, and I think that's what they'd like to do. But he's also a guy that if you start to get people around him, his feet are a little heavy.
Yep.
And I don't think he moves particularly well. I mean, at times can he move? Sure. It's not as if he's non-athletic, but essentially he's a pocket thrower. And I think the issue for him is a lot of his game changes when you get people around him. And I think that's critical in this game.
Yeah, I don't think he's playing at the point right now where you look at what the Eagles saw last week in Eli Manning, what they saw the week before in Ryan Fitzpatrick, where he's hitting the top of his drop and the ball is going to consistently come out immediately. No. I think if you're able to cloud the picture for him, he's going to hold on to that football. And I think that can kind of play into the Eagles' hands a little bit from a defensive line standpoint, because the last few weeks we haven't seen that. And I think that Tom Brady was getting the ball out very, very quickly. Russell Wilson didn't get rid of the ball quickly, got sacked 6 times. And I think, well, like I said, the last 2 weeks, that has not been the case. So it'll be very interesting to see if Washington tries to alter that game plan a little bit to try and see if they can get the ball out of Haskins' hands a little bit. Because I agree with you. The number one thing with him, pressure in his face, whether it's with the front four or with blitz or the threat of blitz, I think kind of throws him off kilter a little bit. You see that he doesn't have the same kind of rhythm and pace to his drop. You see the little hitches, in his lower body. His lead foot is a little bit of a mess, honestly, right now. So, mechanically, certainly there are some issues there, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well.
Yeah, he's stiff in his lower body. I mean, that's the bottom line. We all knew that when he came out as well. Yep. But obviously, because of his arm, people felt that he was a solid prospect, and he can make throws. There's no question. I think that each game he's gotten incrementally better. I think he started 3 games, correct?
I think it might even be more than that now at this point.
Is it 4?
Yeah,
well, whatever.
4. It might be 4 or 5 at this point. But go ahead. Yep.
Each game, I think he's gotten a little better incrementally.
Yeah.
But you make a really good point, which I agree with. I think you got to cloud the picture for him. You got to make him hold the ball.
Yep.
Because I think the longer he holds the ball, the less effective he is.
No doubt.
Because that's where his heavy feet come into play, and then he just doesn't see things as clearly. So that's critical in this game. So we talked about the Eagles mixing coverages more in this game. We talked about a little bit of disguise in the game against the Giants, some late movement. I think you have to see that. And then I think in this game for sure, and this will depend on the score, but I think you'll see some zero blitz. Now, having said that, I think McLaren is a factor. He's a very, very good receiver, and he can run by any Eagles corner.
Yeah, he's really developed into a really good player because it's not even just the raw speed. I mean, he made an outstanding touchdown catch last week. I mean, his ability to separate has been really good. There have been so many times on film where he is wide open and the ball just does not come out. And it's you could see that he's getting a little bit frustrated. You would think, they've got the relationship, former teammates at Ohio State, him and Haskins. But this kid can separate. He's able to finish at the catch point and create after the catch. He's turned into a really nice player, Terry McLaurin.
I couldn't agree more. I think that he's the guy you have to watch in this game. He's the big play guy.
Yeah.
Because, we saw what happened with Slayton. Obviously, one was a missed tackle and one was a bust, but they counted. They were touchdowns.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful. I mean, because McLaren, not only can he run by you, but you're right. You watch him carefully, and I think not a lot of us saw this, and it's easy to say, somebody should have taken him in the first round. That's always easy after the fact. I thought he showed some refinement in Ohio State, but I would never have expected this because he runs really nice routes, and he can separate. He's got both short area quickness, and he's got long speed. So he's the guy that you have to be careful about because, the Eagles came back to win last night, but, they got down 14-3, and I know you were thinking the same thing because the Eagles do not have a lot of explosiveness to their offense. You get into those kinds of games and you get a little nervous.
Yeah, and I think go back to week 1 and McLaurin, he was the guy that nearly beat the Eagles in that game. I mean, he had a couple of big plays down the field where you kind of saw that speed, his ability to run by people. And it's funny you mentioned, watching him at Ohio State, he didn't quite show that refinement. I didn't really see that until I saw him in person in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and that's where he kind of popped off the film, and even watching him live, just seeing him, the suddenness in and out of breaks, the sharpness with his cuts was really, really impressive. His ability to create his own separation there, and that is carried over into his rookie season. So certainly a guy that the Eagles will have to have circled in the game plan this week. I think ultimately, though, in the passing game, look, they've got Steven Sims, the undrafted free agent, who is starting to make some plays for them as a little bit of a slot guy. Trey Quinn missed last week. Paul Richardson missed last week. So we'll see if those guys are able to come back. They're really missing those 2 tight ends. Both Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis are both on injured reserve. So kind of mixing and matching as well from a personnel standpoint with their pass catchers, Washington.
Yeah, and the other rookie is Kelvin Harmon, who gets a lot of snaps.
Sure.
And, he works in the middle of the field pretty well. I mean, one thing about Haskins is he does throw the ball in the middle of the field, and he will drive it. And, I think, look, I guarantee that in the meeting rooms this week, the Eagles defensive coaches are saying, hey, he's going to throw a few to us. Now, it's not that he's thrown a ton of interceptions, but I think the feeling would be that if you can pressure him, and he's been very susceptible to sacks, he doesn't really have pocket movement yet.
Yes.
That's something he's going to have to develop because when all's said and done, he's a pure pocket passer. And pure pocket passers in this league need to be able to navigate the pocket. Haskins at this point cannot do that.
Yep, I think that's something that is certainly evident watching on film. Sacks have been a huge issue for them. The personnel up front is not great. Donald Penn, certainly on the back end of his career. Eric Flowers at guard. Roulier can be beat with power inside. At center, at right guard, Brandon Scherf is one of the best in the league. And you've got Morgan Moses, a solid player at right tackle. But there are certainly some matchups there that the Eagles will look to try and take advantage of as they have in the past. But Greg, looking forward to breaking this game down with you next week, right back here in the studio at the NovaCare Complex. Thanks again for joining us here on Chalk Talk on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade.
Thanks, Fran.
Great stuff from Greg, and you can follow him on Twitter just like I do, at Greg Cosell. And while you're at it, I'm at FDuffy3. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce at PhiladelphiaEagles.com. And you know how much I appreciate each and every one of you who promote this podcast on any form of social media. That is one way to support the show, but the best way is to go onto Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen to the show. Just leave us a quick rating and leave us a quick comment. You can even leave us a question as well. And I want to give a shout out to a couple of people who left some comments in the last few weeks. Let's start off with Fly Eagles, who left a 5-star review saying how much they love the show and all the content. And then Da Fuentes also left a 5-star review saying they love the podcast. They learned about it when they went to their first game at Lincoln Financial Field and have been an avid listener ever since. It keeps them updated on everything being a fan out in Utah. So Da Fuentes, appreciate that. And glad that you enjoyed the experience at the link. I've heard from a lot of people who have enjoyed all of the signage, not just at Lincoln Financial Field, but all around the city of Philadelphia. It's been great to hear from everybody. And thank you for everybody that listens to this show and supports all of our podcasts here at PhiladelphiaEagles.com. All right, let's move on to the next segment of the show. It's time for Scouting Report on Washington rookie quarterback Dwayne Haskins.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, so Dwayne Haskins, a really interesting study. Obviously only a one-year starter playing for Urban Meyer in that shotgun spread system there for Ohio State, and a guy that had a lot of production in his only year as a starter. Heisman Trophy finalist, Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, first-team All-Conference. He was the quarterback of the year, obviously in the Big Ten as well. Pretty well-built kid, and these were the positives that I saw from him on film. I thought he showed the ability to throw with anticipation on those outside receivers, the primary receivers, outside the numbers. So deep hitches, slants, in breakers, the ability where the guy was the primary read outside the numbers, he would get rid of the football before the guy got out of his break. So I thought that was one thing that really stood out. He flashed the ability to make second window throws. And what a second window throw is when he's back and ready to pull the trigger on a throw, and he sees that a defender is in the throwing lane, a guy that's right in the path of where the receiver's getting ready to go. He'll hold it just for a second, just to allow that receiver to clear that defender and throw it into the second window. So not the primary throwing lane, but wait for the receiver to clear and then put it into the second window. I thought he did that numerous times in the quick game at Ohio State. That was one thing I really liked from him on film. He had a nice compact release. He made throws both off platform and from different arm angles depending on the play, and I thought that was impressive throughout the course of a game. He made some really good touch passes at all three levels of the field, and overall, I thought his accuracy was pretty good. He didn't have a lot of bad misses on tape from an accuracy standpoint. Now, when I think you get to some of the negatives, some of the things, obviously, look, he was coming from a shotgun system, so he would have to learn how to take snaps from under center, the footwork that would have to go with that, and then namely as well, have to learn how to take play action drops, turn his back to the defense, and see something completely different than from when he had eyes on the defense pre-snap. So that was an adjustment he would have to make. We see that with a lot of quarterbacks coming from college to the NFL. I thought the limited starting experience also showed up on film, namely when dealing with pressure. And I thought when you watched him at Ohio State, when things were not well defined for him in coverage, I thought he would hold on to the football a little bit more than you would want. I thought he really struggled when he felt the rush coming. His process would speed up a little bit more than you'd like to see. His feet would chatter a little bit more than you would like to see, even sometimes where he would square up to the line of scrimmage. So that was not something you would want. I thought he struggled throwing with anticipation in the middle of the field. That was something we talked about with him as a positive outside the numbers on those primary reads. But when he got into the middle of the field where there were more bodies, a little bit more congested, you saw that he would hold on to the ball a little bit longer than when you would like if things were not well defined. Again, I thought he would hurry himself a little bit more under pressure. He didn't really look comfortable stepping up and climbing into the pocket. He would make those throws, and he still does that in Washington. We talked about it earlier with Greg, where he will have those flash plays, but it didn't look comfortable. It didn't look like he was always in rhythm, and that was something that really stood out to me. He would typically understride. And when you talk about lower body mechanics, this was a guy that I thought, most quarterbacks need to tweak that when they go to the NFL. I thought with Dwayne Haskins, too often you would see him under stride. They call it stepping into the bucket, where he doesn't really take that step with that off leg, and he's too often would step backwards or fall away from throws, and that really affects a guy's ability to drive the football. And I thought you saw that with Dwayne Haskins. He was not a pure A+ arm talent that was going to impress you with all the throws he'd make to all stretches of the field, but the velocity would also get thrown off because of his lower body mechanics. So that was something that really stood out to me on film. He also didn't have the athleticism, the twitch that I thought to be able to escape pressure. And I think this is where I really want to take the conversation. To me, with a rookie quarterback, and all young quarterbacks, we'll say quarterbacks in years 1 through 5. It takes time to be able to recognize things from a defensive standpoint, schematically, be able to get yourself out of pressure. Defensive coordinators are too smart. They're always going to throw looks at you that you have not seen yet as a quarterback. So you can get out of pressure in one of two ways. You can get out of it with your feet, or you can get out of it with your mind, which allows you to beat it with your arm. So I think when you look at Dwayne Haskins, he's not a guy that has that quick twitch athleticism. You think of Jared Goff, you think of Josh Rosen, and there have been a lot of guys that have come out in recent years that have struggled to be able to avoid pressure. That's why guys like Deshaun Watson and Carson Wentz, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray this year, a lot of these young quarterbacks have the ability to get out of pressure with their feet, and that allows them to get outside of the pocket and make big plays. If you don't have that athleticism, you've got to be able to beat it with your mind. That means understanding where the ball has to go when you're facing pressure, when you have pressure that you weren't expecting come from your left. Where's your hot receiver? Pre-snap, can you recognize that, change things up at the line of scrimmage, or can your scheme help overcome that? We've seen that with Jared Goff out in LA with Sean McVay, and there's been a lot written and talked about with what he does to help Jared Goff be able to defeat pressure. So I think ultimately when you look at Haskins, he's not the guy that's going to always be able to avoid, make that first man miss and create outside of structure. So now what needs to happen for him to take that next step, he's got to be able to see things before the snap, and then after the snap understand where he's got to be able to go with the football. When you look at Haskins, that's really going to be the next step he's going to have to take next year going into year 2 as a quarterback. Overall, I wrote that he was a timing and rhythm passer, looked at his best when he was in the quick game, when things are very well defined. I thought he was a little bit of a projection because of the small sample size in college, but I did like some of the flashes that I saw from him as a sophomore. He can't do it all on his own as a quarterback, but he can execute a very well-scripted offense and keep a team on schedule. He'll be a product of his situation. That's why I wrote about him coming out of Ohio State. So this is a guy that, look, they need to continue to build around him. You're looking big picture at Dwayne Haskins. If they buy into him as their quarterback of the future, this is a guy that they're going to need to continue to add receivers next to. Terry McLaurin certainly has developed into a top-level threat so far in his rookie campaign, so continue to add pieces around him. The offensive line needs to get a little bit better long-term, but ultimately this is a guy that I think they can continue to work with. He needs to just continue to make strides, both physically and mentally, at the quarterback position. So those are my notes on Haskins coming out of Ohio State. Still a very interesting player, an interesting case study as we move forward throughout the course of his NFL career. All right, that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Thanks so much to Greg Cosell and all of you out there listening. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I'm Fran Duffy. We will talk to you next week.